All right. Well, good afternoon. It is afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to St. Louis Yoga Week. Well, to the tail end of St. Louis Yoga Week. Wishing you all a very happy International Day of Yoga as we celebrate what has been called India's gift to the world. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation here today, this panel discussion on trauma-sensitive practices within yoga. And I have three individuals here who I very much respect and admire, Laurie Brockhaus, Melissa Dierker, and Dr. Gladys Smith, who are going to join in this conversation today. So hello and welcome.
Thank you. Hello.
So we, as I'm the founder of Yoga Buzz, and which is separate from St. Louis Yoga Week, and yet here I am. But we did a panel discussion on trauma-informed yoga, gosh, 2015, I think it was. And I remember it was still a very new idea to me, having been teaching yoga for a while at that point. But the interest, we had like over 100 people that joined for that, or signed up for at least for that discussion. And so Laurie was a part of that. And I'm looking forward to I've continued to be just really grateful for the ongoing unfolding of this conversation, because there's no one answer or perspective, right? So before we dive in though, I'd love for each of you to just take a minute or so to introduce yourself and talk about you. Let's start, Laurie, let's start with you.
Hi, I'm Laurie Brockhaus. So I am a yoga instructor that I've been teaching for about 15 years now, and I'm also a licensed clinical social worker in the state of Missouri. My work for the past 20 years has been with youth in education and in social work. And currently I run a nonprofit co-founded and run a nonprofit called the Oxygen Project, which brings yoga into schools and youth organizations in the St. Louis area, mostly focused on St. Louis City and areas that have experienced high rates of trauma and stress. And I also lead group classes and yoga trainings at Urban Breath Yoga in St. Louis.
Thank you. Melissa, how about you?
Yeah, my name is Melissa Dierker, and I am a social worker. I've been a social worker for 10 years, working in primarily the world of child welfare. I've been teaching yoga, trauma-informed yoga to youth for 4 years, and I own Complete Harmony, a trauma-informed yoga studio located in Maplewood, Missouri, for youth and families. And I'm a mom of 3 and busy all the time and loving it. So.
Thank you. And Gladys.
Hi. So I'm a psychotherapist, and currently I work at Washington University Medical School as a trauma therapist, and I have a private practice and I focus on trauma. I'm also a registered yoga teacher. I just finished my 500 level, but I still have like 20 hours of class to teach, so I've got to do that. And oh my God, it's so hard. But I served in the military for 27 years. So, and I worked as an EMT paramedic initially, and then as a counselor. So I saw a lot of trauma. Certified in Warriors at Ease trauma, which is focused for military members, trauma conscious, trauma-informed, open heart meditation, and that's just kind of who I am. Oh, I also teach at the VA. I teach volunteer at the VA on a weekly basis. When things start back up, I'll start back up and start teaching back over there. And I teach at Tycoon Yoga, and which is in University City. So that's a little bit.
You just do a couple things. Each of you just do a couple things. Well, let's start the conversation. Oh, hi, Kitty. Let's start the conversation with what is trauma, and why is it? Well, let's start with what is trauma. Who wants to tackle that one?
We're all waiting for one another. I'll begin, and then I'd love for my colleagues to join in. Sure. So I always define trauma as something that overwhelms an individual's ability to cope. or overwhelms the capacity to function on a day-to-day basis. It's something unexpected. It's something that happens that takes one's sense of control and choice away. And it's a subjective experience, meaning that it's not, we don't define trauma as a certain experience. It depends, the experience depends on the individual and their response.
Sure.
That was a brilliant answer.
Check.
Yeah.
So to add, it can be cumulative, it can be ongoing, it could be an episodic event. And it, like you said, it is subjective for each person. And each time an individual that experiences a trauma, there's a new trauma that may go on side of that, connect with that, or compound that. So usually one event doesn't occur. Those who have been traumatized, I find that the statistics show 50 to 75% chance of them being re-traumatized again because of not knowing boundaries. That's one of the things that trauma does. Your boundaries are just blurred and you're not really sure how to operate and how to navigate in a world without trauma. And not even knowing oftentimes that you've been traumatized.
Yeah, absolutely. Melissa, do you have anything to add?
No, I think that they covered everything. We look at it as an overwhelm to our nervous system and ways that we're losing ways to cope, looking at it as a one-time event or something that reoccurs. And then we do see that statistics that Dr. Smith mentioned of it happening again in some element or way of our life. So it interrupts our life. And for the kids we see that.
So why is this important to address within the context of yoga? Because isn't yoga just a place to go feel good and get your stretch on and chill?
It is that too. But, I like to, Nikki Meyer, she has a program that's called the 12-step yoga. And the phrase that you've all heard, we all use, the issues are in our tissues. Melissa said earlier about, it grounds in your body. So along with yoga allows you to breathe, to be in the here and now, and it allows you to notice your body and then move. And that's why it's important to combine that, because you can listen to your cognition. What am I thinking? And then realize what I'm feeling. And it also opens our window of tolerance. Because if you can breathe through something, it allows your window of tolerance to be larger, which means that you can accept more so that you can be clear and right now, here in the moment.
Yeah, I'll add to that. I think we've seen in somewhat recent years, many people, well, in general, the practice of yoga becoming more widespread, more well-known, more accessible in some ways. And we have a lot of research now that shows that yoga is effective at healing from trauma. And by healing, I always mean like managing the effects of, and also like for yoga for physical health conditions. So in that, we have a lot of doctors and mental health therapists, perhaps with not a lot of knowledge on yoga, recommending it to clients and to patients. And so we have people who have experienced trauma and are coming to yoga for healing because maybe their therapist told them it would be good, but not quite knowing enough about yoga to choose a class that would be effective and healing for them. And so if we don't have instructors and spaces that are trauma sensitive, we do run the risk of triggering or re-traumatizing for the yoga place, which is meant to be quite healing, to actually become harmful.
Yeah, Elle, I would add that one thing I really like about the yoga piece when we're talking about using it to navigate this journey of trauma, these effects of trauma, is that we see a disconnection from our body when trauma occurs. And one thing that yoga does is it bridges that connection between the mind and the body. And so we can move at a slower rate with the trauma sensitive. We can allow time for exploring that piece. We can allow time for that reconnection of things that we don't see. An example of like moving your arm, and kids don't even know where their arm is. They're just so disconnected. And so trauma sensitive yoga takes that into mind. It takes that into awareness of not everybody is in the same place. of being connected with their mind and their body and who they are, and allows room for that connection to start to grow and nurture.
Absolutely. I know for me personally, I came to yoga and developed a relationship with experiencing my body, and then felt things that I hadn't really ever felt before, and didn't have a language to understand what was happening. And so, you know, without telling a long story, essentially, like, to then learn about trauma and learn about its prevalent, or what happens in a yoga setting or in a somatic, a physical experiential setting, was like, oh, that's what's been going on these last few years. But, you know, to not be around teachers who had that understanding, and to not have it myself, it was a very confusing experience for me. And then very empowering once I understood. So let's talk about, Melissa, you and I kind of talked about this the other night. So what's the difference between trauma informed and trauma sensitive and trauma conscious and trauma aware and trauma hyphen all these other words?
I think this is a really long answer, and I think I can help start the conversation, but my amazing panel friends here are going to jump in too. So this is always the main question, right? Are you trauma sensitive? Are you trauma informed? Trauma conscious is something that was new to me when we started having this whole conversation. So one thing that we look at is, in the yoga world, we define trauma informed and trauma sensitive very different than maybe in the mental health world. That when you're looking at trauma sensitive in the yoga world, to me, how I interpret it when I entered the yoga world was, it's the step before trauma informed. I'm aware of what trauma is, and I'm sensitive that people may have it, but I haven't really changed anything about the class. But I know about it. I'm sensitive that you may have it, and I can adapt if I need to, but I'm not necessarily changing everything to accommodate it 100%. And then trauma informed in the yoga world, which I think is following like the school systems and different approaches like that, says we're going to be trauma informed, which we're going to change our practices to accommodate the fact that somebody in this room could have experienced trauma, and we want them to be successful. We want this to eliminate as many triggers as possible, and we want to be able to accommodate these traumas that are coming into our class. And then the mental health world says, well, we have trauma sensitive yoga in the form of TCTSY, right? Which is the trauma centered, trauma sensitive yoga from like the Kripalu Center and from David Emerson that you get certified in. And that type of trauma sensitive yoga looks at it and says, this is a complement to therapy. So it's the ultimate form of mental health approach of yoga that says, we are really not going to trigger you. We're really taking all of these things into account. The classes are kind of uniformed in how they look so that you can eliminate those. But there's a whole program that you go to get certified in this TCTSY. And so I think when you're looking at it from those verbiages, the trauma sensitive gets kind of confusing, because are we talking about it in this realm over here or this realm over here? Can we combine them? Probably not, because this is the mental health world is its whole other thing, right? And then, yeah, so that's how I look at those three, that you see the same common terms of trauma sensitive. I mean, I don't want to keep speaking. So if somebody wants to take trauma consciousness and trauma aware, or add on to trauma sensitive, go for it.
Yeah, I've always looked at the Missouri Department of Mental Health put out some standards and a framework for these terms a few years ago. Gladys, you might know more about that. But I have another cat that's trying to get in here too. That's why you see my hand going up. So, and the way that they're conceptualizing these terms for specifically mental health organizations. Not a way to control a cat, specifically mental health organizations. And so they use the terms trauma-aware, trauma-sensitive, trauma-informed, and trauma-responsive. Trauma-aware is, according to the Missouri model, is, I know about trauma, understand it's out there, understand it's prevalent. Trauma sensitive is, as Melissa described the first time, it's having some awareness of trauma and maybe making some slight changes. In the yoga context, that might be changing our language a little bit, changing the way we offer choices in the class. And then trauma, but not quite like changing the whole environment or the whole way that we practice instructing yoga. And then trauma informed is really about like making, I think Melissa explained this fairly well, making things, making big changes based to allow the environment to be safe specifically for people who have experienced trauma. And then trauma responsive, according to the Missouri model, is basically an overhaul of the organization toward that, making sure everything's rooted in an understanding of trauma and making sure, trying to ensure a safe place for that.
Yeah. So I can say check, ditto, ditto, ditto on all of those, because you went over the Missouri model of what trauma looks like, being aware of what it is, and then being sensitive in the class. And each one offers invitatory language, a little slower movement. But one of the things with being more trauma informed and being trauma sensitive is that the leader, the teacher, the clinician they really do have an in-depth knowledge of trauma and really know what to do when someone abreacts or they have a reaction. And a trauma-informed, trauma-sensitive, trauma-aware class always has resources available, whether that clinician or whether that yoga teacher is a clinician or a yoga teacher or either or, you have to have resources for individuals because you can't just say, oh, we had a great class and see you later. That's not trauma-informed, trauma-sensitive, or trauma-aware. Now, the difference in trauma-conscious is there's actually no difference, except that it works out of 4 R's, the value 4 R's. You determine, talk about the stages of trauma treatment and what happened, safety, and awareness of it, mourning through it, and then moving through. So trauma conscious looks at 4 R's, recognizing the signs and symptoms, really understanding and knowing them, brain-based behaviors, somatic-based behaviors, and then what recovery looks like. The second R is realizing the broad impact and the process of recovery, what that looks like. The recidivism rate is so high for people coming and going for treatment for trauma that you're wondering what are they getting, but they get little bits as that window of tolerance increases. They get more skills and they're able to tolerate more. They're able to be in the here and now more. The third R was respond in creating integrated practices and policies. And I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes. The other part is resisting re-traumatizing a person. Tell it'll be okay, it'll be all right, push through it, all of those things, making sure that from the time that person enters the room to the time that they leave, that they have a sense of safety, because trauma and those who've been traumatized get mixed up. Being safe and feeling safe. Mm-hmm. Being safe and feeling safe is our goal for every person, so that you can be in the moment and being aware. Then the last difference, and same thing almost, that trauma conscious uses is that it uses principles of EMDR, like bilateral stimulation, padding, somatic resourcing, bringing up something, a positive, and tapping that in, sensory motor keys, cues, learning what triggers are, and then learning how to counteract them in the body. And then it uses things from internal family systems, like the parts and meditation. And so that's the difference. You can either be a clinician that uses it in your therapy with the person, or you can use it with a group, or you can be a yoga teacher that uses the aspects of it. The main key is that everyone works from their I was going to say their window of tolerance, but you want them to work from their window of tolerance, but work from their knowledge base. We don't want therapists to, pretend that they're yoga teachers, or yoga teachers to pretend that they're therapists. But that's why this is all integrated, so that we can all work together. The resources are there, And the difference for trauma conscious is that, you know, it works from all different forms of trauma, race-based trauma, domestic violence, sexual assault, and it does have that clinical piece to it. Don't have to be a clinician to do it, but it has that clinical piece that we want you to have the knowledge of it. So that's the difference. And Nikita Githel, she developed that, the Trauma Conscious Institute, and you can receive treatment as a clinician from that base. You can receive it as a yoga teacher where you can integrate it in your work, or as a clinician, you can actually do your case studies following the trauma conscious method. So it uses informed, aware, and sensitive yoga as well.
That's awesome. It seems like there's such fine lines between each of the categories, and even like trauma sensitive means two different things depending on who you're talking to. So it seems to me like the biggest thing that anybody can do is to just be really clear in what it is that they are doing in the class that they're offering, and not just trying to stamp a label on it, which I see a lot. And I know we all see that a lot, and probably I'll speak for myself, but I get frustrated because I'm like, what do you mean? You don't just get a sticker to put and be like, I'm trauma informed. It's like, what does that mean? So yeah, that explanation piece is so important.
I'll add to that context too. I think, you know, as a clinician in some roles and a yoga teacher in some roles, and where that overlaps in some roles, I'm not, you know, doing yoga therapeutically when I'm teaching a group class, public class, you know. So I would do things differently in those different contexts, use knowledge differently. So I think that's, yeah, that definitely what Gladys mentioned, just like being very clear on your knowledge base. And you also mentioned something previously, is always having like referrals, I think is really important.
Scope of practice is so incredibly important, because each of you have degrees in social work and beyond, right? Like I have a degree in history, but I'm an advocate for trauma informed practices and educating around the prevalence of trauma. And so I got to know where my line ends. And that's why the three of you are here to talk as the panelists. So what are some simple ways that any yoga teacher could make their own teaching space, their classes, a little bit more trauma sensitive or trauma aware? Now I don't even know which word to use. I don't know who's judging me based on what word I've used and what they're, anyway. But what are some ways, Laurie, you talked about how a lot of health professionals are referring people to yoga, and then yoga teachers, are not aware. So how can we make some simple steps?
Well, first of all, say get training. So listening to this, 45-minute talk is not going to make you trauma sensitive, but it might prompt you to do more study. But I think most of the trauma sensitive principles that we utilize in the context of teaching yoga are based on the understanding that trauma takes away a sense of choice and control. And so our task in the context of teaching yoga is building that back up in this environment that there's already an understood dynamic because of how we've been socialized, that the teacher has control, So in a lot of ways, we want to work to break that down and encourage more. I always call it more of a conversation where we understand as a teacher that our students have the expertise in their own experiences in their own body, in, like Gladys says, what feels safe for them. I'm not the expert in that, So having that understanding that we want to break down that typical dynamic in as much as possible, and understanding that there are many places in the context of teaching yoga that we can either give control or take away control. We give control when we utilize invitational language, cues that are more inviting, if you'd like, when you're ready, things like that, rather than cues that basically are saying you must do this in a certain way. We're being more trauma sensitive or trauma aware when we're understanding that we're not like trying to teach toward a certain look of a posture or shape. We're not, we're encouraging more of the individual feeling in that. We're encouraging that body awareness and awareness of how the body, the individual body moves and how we connect with that. I'll stop there and let others build on to that.
No, it's good. It's so funny. I was trying not to laugh when you were talking. I wasn't laughing at what you were saying, but I was thinking of just being in the military for so long. And, you know, we march and it's left, turn right, straight, turn left, turn right. Okay, if your class feels like that, it's not trauma aware, trauma sensitive, trauma focused. It's allowing a person, and how you change your class, it's allowing a person to explore where they are and the moment right now. They could be still in child pose and you guys are in savasana, and that's okay, because it's giving a person the choice, like what you're saying, to explore what they need to get what they need so that they can move forward. You know, making sure that that it is a safe space and that you take away that power, that typically the teacher will have. Offer information, offer, you know, resources, offer poses, but then allowing that person to really take the alternatives and making the choice that they would like. And that inventory, that invitatory language is really important, and slowing down just a little bit,
I love watching as each of you are talking. We're all just like, yes, yes, yes.
Like you can't nod enough. Like, yes.
Melissa, what would you add?
So for some key things for what we do, I would say would be looking at that choice that was mentioned, and invitational language is huge. Also, one thing we do with youth is we don't comment on what the shape looks like in their body. You can't tell if you're doing yoga right from the outside because it's an internal practice. So I'm not going to comment or adjust you or do anything differently than what you're doing, because if you're disconnected from your body and this is the way you feel your body, I'm going to give you space to do that. I always set up some boundaries with kids as far as saying, you know, this is your mat is your space. And so as long as you're being safe and appropriate, I don't care what you do on your space. Right. So if that means, like Gladys mentioned, laying in child shape, then go for it. It's your space. It's what you need to do. And so I think, slowing down, that invitational language, that choice, those are three elements I think that you can add in. And when you're thinking of language, I think language is huge, right? Trauma-informed yoga is supposed to be inclusive. And so when I'm thinking of my language, and even if we're looking at it from a gender standpoint, if I say, hey guys, when I walk in, my languaging has already started out not being inclusive. So just thinking simple terms, what can I change? Hey everyone, or, you know, introducing what's going to happen ahead of time. With trauma, it's unexpected. It happens and we don't know what's going to happen next. And so adding these little changes in can make somebody who comes into your class feel a little more at ease. Oh, we're going to do sun salutations and then we're going to cool down. I may not know what those are if it's my first class, but I know that there's a sequence to some things. And I know that I can stop. I had somebody once say, why do you always give an invitation before each shape, before each thing you do? Because with trauma, I may have forgotten I had a choice when we move on. I may have dissociated the first time you gave me a choice. So I can't start the class by saying, you have a choice to do these things or not. I actually need to be reminded throughout the class in case I'm not present. And so I think that these are all big things to actually add and change into your class. And I think that Laurie hit the nail on the head of extra training, because we don't think of these things, right? Different shapes that we teach trigger people and put them in states of PTSD or flashbacks or reminders. And so there's just so many elements to this that I think training would be the first absolute step. But choice and languaging, I guess, would be my next ones if you there's just so many, Elle. That's like a loaded
so
question.
much, right? Well, and that's the thing too, is that there's no one prescriptive way to teach in a trauma-informed fashion, because, or whatever you call it, like even if you say this is trauma sensitive yoga, this is trauma centers trauma sensitive yoga, that way of practicing may trigger somebody else. Like the abundance of invitational language may feel really unsafe to somebody who's like, please tell me what to do. Like, can we start there, right? So it's like, for me, in my journey in education around how I can do better as a yoga teacher, and therefore better as a human being in the world, because really, like, being trauma informed in the world is important too. It's just constantly being aware of what is my intention behind what I'm saying, why am I saying it, how am I approaching this, and then learning from somebody when something doesn't land well, and trying to see, well, is there a different way that I can do that, or not, or, you know, or even just me, I might just look like somebody that is triggering for somebody when they walk in, and they may not feel comfortable practicing yoga with me because of their own experience, right? So then that's, oh, go ahead.
I think you hit the nail on the head when it comes to triggers, right? So the main goal is not to eliminate them completely, because that's impossible. Mm-hmm. The color of my shirt could remind you of where you were, where an assault happened, right? So like, I can't eliminate them completely, but what I can do is remove the key things that we know, right? If I have you have your hands behind your back in a shape, and you saw your parents become arrested and were removed from your home, that's going to trigger you. So I'm not going to teach any shapes and have you put your hands behind your back. I'm never going to do that. There are shapes that I completely avoid. So it's a matter of, yes, like you hit the nail on the head completely. I can't remove every trigger, and I know that in the world. But my goal is to remove those big ones if I can, so that you have a space that is safe, and we can address those other ones that come up without having to address these giant ones, right? A siren goes by the studio. I haven't gotten you triggered up until that point, but we can work on that siren going by the studio, because we're kind of in a relaxed state up until then. Yeah. So yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned that. Like, it's not to remove them all the way. It's to remove the ones we know of.
Well, and I think for yoga teachers who are solely trained as yoga teachers, recognizing that there's a long history of power dynamics within and power over in the way that yoga asana has been taught and handed down through the traditions, and oppression within the yoga. We're using yoga to do it, but that's a whole other thing. And so recognizing that's sort of built into the way that a lot of us have been taught, as well. So dismantling that takes a lot of work, and you got to do the work inside before you can share it outward, right? So this is then, I think, a really good segue into my next question, which is, each of you work with a variety of different audiences. Like Gladys, you work with veterans, as well as other groups. Melissa, you work with kids, etc. How do you adapt what it is that you're doing for a different audience?
Well, I guess for me, it's knowing the audience. Sometimes I would know the audience that I'm going into to serve. If it's going to be a veterans class, if it's not a veterans class, checking in with each of the individuals in the class, and then it gives me a general sense of how I need to differentiate the class. I need to make sure that I use some references from the military. I need to make sure that I'm slow and intentional. I need to use language that's easy for everyone to understand. So differentiating it is really knowing who's in the class. And that's where, for me, a check-in comes in. And then oftentimes classes are pre-signed up, or, they'll know that it's a trauma-focused class or a trauma-sensitive class. Let me make sure I use the right word. I don't want anybody to judge me either. But I guess where I know the audience, and they know why I'm there. I'm here today to teach you about being trauma aware and what that is. And we're just gonna have a class and talk about what trauma is, find some safety within our body and what that means. Or if it's they're more experienced, I can go a little bit more in depth. So really just knowing the audience and then first questioning, so what brings you here to class? You know, and sometimes people will say, I don't know, I just wanted to stretch, you know, and they're welcome to.
And then you trick them into more.
I think that's so interesting because I think Melissa and I were kind of nodding to each other, like some of the same techniques we use with kids, you know, that rapport building is huge. So beginning with a check-in, you know, so that the kids get a sense of, and adults get a voice in stating, you know, get a voice into the session. And as instructors or facilitators of the group, we get a sense of how people are doing and can tailor instruction to that. So I think that is key with youth is building trust, and they will be very honest with you, blunt, if they have not built that. If we came into a classroom and just started teaching asana, started teaching yoga as we would in a yoga studio setting, I'm sure kids would be walking out the door or, you know, given some dirty looks, like the trust hasn't been built. So with youth, we, Melissa's more creative, so I'll let her talk about some of the like specific techniques she uses for kids, but generally speaking, we make sure that building of trust is first and foremost. We design classes or sessions around body awareness, recognizing how various emotions show up in the body, and then how we can respond rather than react to them. So it's less about making sure we cover this, and this shape, and more about, are we teaching these certain skills via the practice of yoga. So with working with youth, we do a lot of breath work. We do a lot of like foundational traditional yoga shapes. And we do like make it developmentally appropriate and engaging, which is where I think Melissa shines.
You are the kind, you shine there too. Laurie, you talked about the trust, right? And we do that with agreements. Our class has a running list of agreements that's the same in every class, unless the class wants to add different agreements to that makes them feel safe. We do the check-ins. We do sometimes the finger check-ins with where you are at. And I always tell people that my goal for our trauma-informed yoga classes is not an exercise class. If you want your kiddo to come do some strength building classes and get a workout in, then these aren't the classes for you. We use yoga as a playground to mindfulness. That's what we do. So yoga is the playground to mindfulness. It's the way that we connect with our bodies to start that process of putting words to feelings and learning who we are and how our body moves. And so I would say we have a more mindfulness-based practice. There's a lot of choice than our classes. So it's that fun kid yoga class. I always say it's not that it's a therapy where you sit on a couch and you occasionally move your fingers and toes. No, it's a lively, fun kid yoga class. But the languaging has changed and the agreements are all on board. And that trust, that safety element has to be there. But it helps kids learn. This is my mat, it's my space. I have to ask before I go on somebody else's mat. I've actually never had anybody have to ask before they come touch my body or close to me before. Oh, right. And how convenient now that is for COVID-19, because our kids who come to our class know I actually can't leave my yoga mat and go on somebody else's without asking their permission. And sometimes we mess up, but we get a new second. And so I think there also has to be that repair too, right? We had a kid knock down the curtain in the yoga studio and she started panicking and freaking out and running all over. And she said, I'm going to get in so much trouble. I've ruined everything. And now I'm emotionally manipulating you. And I was like, oh, first of all, how how sad is it that somebody told this 5-year-old that she emotionally manipulates, because she was really scared at that moment. And so it was a matter of connecting and saying, I actually don't think you meant to knock down that curtain. I think you were trying to do what our next step in class always is. And we have people that know how to fix this. So I wonder if we could try again, right? So that repair is always huge, because the way we heal through trauma is through relationships. Unfortunately, the way that trauma occurs is a lot of times through relationships too, right? Yeah, so there's that disconnection. So that's what we do in our classes to work through that, is kind of the same as an adult approach, just with a lot more energy.
Well, I know there's some folks that are watching live on Facebook. If you have any questions, I've got it up on my screen here. So if you want to type any questions into the comment section for these last few minutes that we've got here, please feel free to. The question that I want to ask as we start to head in towards the end. So also, first of all, or third of all, or also, Gladys is going to lead a trauma conscious yoga practice here when we're done with this. We're going to move into a new live stream for that. If you want to give that a try, I'm very much looking forward to that. I've been sitting in this chair most of the day, so I'm looking forward to a little yoga myself. Where was I? Oh, so the question that I wanted to ask is, what advice would you have for somebody who's looking to try yoga, who is looking to try yoga specifically to build their resiliency and recovery from trauma? Who's just like, I don't even know, like, do I just go to the place down the street? Do I need to call a specialist? Like, what what? Huh.
I would say that they could go to the place down the street and explore, investigate, research. You know, we always tell people to explore it. What does it feel like? What do you think? Ask the question. You know, yeah, go to the place down the street, see if that fits, if that's where you are. And then as you join the class, participate in the class, and get to know other people, they'll start talking about other classes. You know, hey, I've heard about this trauma stuff. You know, and think, oh yeah, I went to that trauma studio over there on Broadway or wherever it was. But I would say, yeah, try not to make it too hard, because then you won't do it. Just go to the place down the street, investigate what they have, and then question while you're there, and continue your research.
Well, it's amazing right now, because yoga studios have been closed for the last few months. A lot of places have moved their offerings online. So it's a perfect opportunity, especially in St. Louis, to go and just start sort of like sampling these different teachers, because you know you'll resonate with people and you will not resonate with other people. So just keep trying. Yeah.
With the virtual, you can just shut the class down.
That is true.
Like,
nope.
I would echo Gladys in saying explore, you know, whether that be talking to friends who you know who attend or teach yoga classes. I always mention to yoga teacher trainees that they can be great resources for people who they know want to get into a practice, because they kind of know these aspects of yoga that somebody new might not even think to ask about. I remember someone asking me to guide them toward a class, and I knew a little bit about her background. And she asked about attending a certain studio, and I said, yeah, you could go to this studio. No, there are windows. There's a big window in this studio. And in this studio, there's not. Just like, no, windows, I'm not going to feel comfortable if there's a big window. So little things like that, if you are a yoga teacher and guiding someone else, like kind of understand what could be, as Melissa mentioned, kind of those big things, like about the teacher's training and approach, and know about the physical spaces that would lend or not lend to a positive experience for someone.
I think that if you have an understanding of where you are in your trauma, or you're a therapist looking for a trauma-informed yoga class or a yoga practice for a client, that there's no harm in calling first and kind of asking some basic questions like that. If you know somebody is not okay with mirrors or windows, or if you know that hot yoga would trigger a response this way. Like maybe just getting the basics of where everything is. And or they restorative can be really triggering. Maybe they just can't be still with their bodies. I wonder what other offerings. I think it's okay to explore around before you go to, but definitely try out, because each class is going to be so different, and there are people around town with trauma informed, so why not call, ask questions, and figure out what it looks like before you go. I think with trauma, we also like to know what we're jumping into. It makes us feel safer. So if you have a running list of questions, have those ready, and you just be open to answering those when people call.
Absolutely. I think, the thing that I try to encourage health professionals or anybody who might be referring people to yoga is to either refer them to somebody to talk to about yoga, or actually spend some time doing yoga and trying out some different styles. Because I remember going to the doctor when I had a mental health crisis a few years back, and it was triggered because of a relationship within yoga specifically. And I remember just being like, doc, like, do you have any suggestions of anything I could try? And he's like, well, they say yoga and meditation is helpful. And I just wanted to throw like the examination table at him. It was just like, that's terribly unhelpful. And I feel like I'm a yoga teacher. Like, why would you say that to me? So just giving informed referrals, right? Not just being like, well, I found this person on Facebook who does yoga and says they're trauma informed, so you should go try that. Like, actually try that person's class to see like what do they mean when they say that.
Right. And I think trying the different types of yoga too, right? Yeah. We don't realize all the different types that exist. I'm still learning I hear something else and I'm like, oh, that's a great, I've never tried that one. But like we mentioned, restorative, it may be really refreshing for you, or it may be really triggering. And so just kind of learning what they are and how they work and operate and finding that out. Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah, I wanted to ditto all that specifically. And then for clinicians and for yoga teachers is to not stop learning, continue learning from each other, like learning from all of us. We all learn from each other and, hold each other and like, oh my God, Laurie, oh my God, listen. If you can't lose that thirst, because if you start to lose that thirst for knowledge in this, because there's so much to learn, you have to start to take it back and look at, I need to practice a little self-compassion, and make sure I'm working on my self-care plan, and making sure that you are connected with others in the field, and you keep growing as a yoga teacher and as a clinician. That's so important.
Yeah. I think, yes. I feel that the most dangerous yoga teacher, and probably the most dangerous of any other profession, is somebody who thinks that they absolutely know the one perfect way forward. That is such a big red flag for me personally, because it invalidates my experience if I disagree with them in any way. And so yeah, that being open to learning is so important. And I'm so grateful to each of you for being just part of an ongoing conversation. And I really do admire the work that each of you do, and have been so grateful to be able to learn from you and be in your general vicinity over the last several years. So thank you so much. And like I said, Gladys is going to lead us through a trauma conscious practice here in about 5 minutes. So if you're watching now, go back to the Facebook live page for St. Louis Yoga Week and check that out, because that'll start in a new link. And then you can always come back and visit it later. We're saving all of these recordings. And just a quick reminder that, all of these are offered at no cost, and we are raising money for the St. Louis Yoga Teacher Relief Fund to award $500 grants to St. Louis area yoga teachers who have been deeply impacted financially by the impact of COVID-19, as well as Black yoga teachers in our community who are sharing the practice within their community to increase resiliency, and especially right now to offer space for healing in a culturally sensitive way, right? Because that's a big part of trauma sensitive as well. So thank you all for being a part of this. Thank you for both helping clarify that there is no clarity around all the different terms within trauma, trauma hyphen this and that, and the importance of continuing to learn. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.